So in a lot of parts of the country, we're dealing with high flooded water. And a lot of times when you get that high flooded water, it can spin a lot of guys out because it does a lot of different things for the fish. So what I want to talk about today is my favorite baits for fishing high muddy water, because I think it's going to play in everybody's arsenal, and I think it's something you guys need to know. So stick around, you guys are not going to want to miss this video. So fishing flooded water can be some of the best fishing that you've ever had, but it can also be some of the most frustrating fishing that you've ever had, because the one thing that it does is it disperses those fish like never before. They have all new water they can roam in, and they get in all these little backwaters that are hard to reach. And if you're not throwing the right baits, it can really be like trying to fish for a needle in a haystack. It can be really, really frustrating because there's so much cover, you almost don't know what to fish. And so a lot of guys end up reaching for a black and blue jig. I know this is a green pumpkin, but they reach for a jig, or they reach for something where they're trying to flip and go real slow and methodical to really break it down. And that can be a good way to catch fish, but it can also be a good way to waste your entire day. So let's start talking about some of my favorite baits for fishing when the water gets high and up in the bushes like we have here today. The first thing that I like to focus on when I get high flooded water like this is covering water to figure out where those fish are gonna be, because when you get this high dirty water, a lot of times those fish spread way out, but they're also very aggressive. And so I like to go to moving baits first to try to find the areas that those fish are in. And so some of my favorite moving baits are gonna be baits that put off a lot of thump, because a lot of times when that water gets high, it gets dirty. The first bait that I like to reach for is a chatterbait. I love a chatterbait because I can put it anywhere I want. I can skip it back up into those places, and I can really cover a ton of water. And with that vibration, what it does is it really calls those fish out of a lot of cover. The one bait that people don't talk about when they talk about chatterbaits is the big blade. Z-Man has a big blade chatterbait where it is a bigger blade and it puts off a lot more thump. It is really going to call those fish out of all of the flooded cover that you have around. Another great option is a spinnerbait. You know, a spinnerbait puts off a ton of thump, and I really like a spinnerbait because the way they're designed is it doesn't get hung up as much as a chatterbait does. So one downfall of a chatterbait is it does have a tendency to get hung up in the bushes, where a spinnerbait does not. But one thing I do like to note with my spinnerbaits is when I get this water where it's up and muddy a little bit, I like to go to more Indiana or Colorado style blades, you know, your Jason Christie style spinnerbaits, because they're gonna put off more thump. I can fish them slower, more methodical around cover, but still cover water in an efficient way. That is really, really important. Another great bait for covering a ton of water and calling fish out is gonna be your topwater baits. And one go-to topwater bait is a buzzbait. Because a buzzbait is gonna put off a ton of sound, it's gonna call those fish out of all the different crevices, so you can figure out, are they on the edges of the flooded bushes, or are they all the way up in the dirt? Because that's an important piece of the puzzle when you get this flooded water. Did they stay where the original water line was, or did they go all the way up in there? And that can really make or break you as far as your fishing. And so to do that, you really have to figure out where they're at, and that's why you need these moving baits. But if they're way up in the dirt, a lot of times they'll be tight in those bushes and whatnot, and you have to throw something that's gonna call them out. And so a buzzbait, again, does a great job because it comes over top of cover and doesn't get hung up as easy. You can really fish freer and fish better around cover, and they also skip really, really well, like I've talked about in previous videos, so it allows you to put this bait anywhere you want it. Now, a lot of times if you're in an area where that water's flooded, but it seems like it's clearing up a little bit, and you don't think those fish are wanting all that vibration, say you're getting this fish where they're short striking it, or you're getting fish that are missing the bait, I like to go to a swim jig. That is my under the radar best flooded bait, because you can put it anywhere you want it. You can fish it like a jig if you miss a fish, where you can slow it down and let it hop on the bottom, and you can also skip it anywhere you want, you know, and it does a great job at covering water when you put a Z-Man goat on the back of there, because it puts off a lot of thump, and it does a great job of imitating bait fish, bluegill. You can put a black and blue one on, depending what your water clarity is. It allows you to change very, very easily to match the conditions that you have. And it also just fishes amazing because it has a weighted system in there with a jig head. You can slow it down a little bit to get a little bit deeper as you're coming out, or you can speed it up and change your rod tip angle to fish it super, super shallow, depending on how far back in there you're casting. So that's usually one of my go-tos, just because of the versatility of that bait. Now, all the fish aren't going to be necessarily super, super aggressive. You're going to have some areas where you slow down a little bit, where you miss a fish, you're going to have a bait that follows up. And one great bait to do that is going to be a Texas rig. You know, pitching a Texas rig or a jig when you get into some of those areas where you're really starting to see a lot of fish, you're getting a lot of bites, and you want to pick through it a little bit more thoroughly. that's when I really like to go to a Texas rig or a jig. You know, black and blue is typically my go-to, but a green pumpkin is also a great option depending on how dirty your water is. Is it fresh mud? If it's fresh, dirty water, you're gonna want a black and blue, versus if it is cleaner mud, like it's been there for a few days, then I will go more natural because those fish are getting more acclimated to that dirty water. It's also important to note, if you're around the spawn, a lot of times you're gonna have to slow down just because those fish are gonna be more on beds and they're gonna be more locked on, so you're gonna have to slow down a little bit. But you could still utilize those moving baits to figure out the key areas that those fish are setting up in, because a lot of times you'll catch the males. So if I'm fishing flooded cover like we have and I catch a small male, a lot of times what I'll do is I will slow down for a hot second and pitch in some of my favorite creature baits, my craw baits, my jigs, you know, a Senko, flipping a Senko, to see if they're paired up in there or if I'm just having to cover water to run into a female. Now, one of the best baits for fishing flooded water that people don't really ever talk about is going to be a frog. We just saw Zach Burge win on Lake Eufaula with it because those fish were up in the shallow bushes, they're around the spawn, and they were dirt shallow. Everybody was throwing chatterbaits and spinnerbaits past these fish and they weren't reacting as easily. But when you put a bait that moves a little bit slower, is a little bit louder, calls those fish up like this 6th Sense frog, you can really get some incredible bites. And again, it's weedless, so you can put it wherever you want when you're fishing around that flooded cover, because again, it's pretty thick cover when you think about it. A lot of times you get into those places where the water typically doesn't go. There's gonna be bushes, there's gonna be tree limbs, there's gonna be even taller grass. And so you have to have a bait that you can get in and out of there with minimal to no struggle. And that's what a frog is going to be able to do. And you can also skip it and put it into tight to reach places, which is really, really important. And another thing to note is frogs just tend to get bigger bites. So you need to keep that in mind when you're fishing flooded cover. Hopefully this helps you guys next time your body of water goes up a little bit to understand what baits you need to be throwing in those specific areas. So for more content like this, hit that subscribe button to follow along. But God bless every single one of you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.